Good afternoon. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed, here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Stu, you get really involved when there's a disaster here in New York, don't you?
Yes, we have with our WHCR emergency broadcast team up at City College. Yep.
And you may really need to. Do you see the story I sent you?
I did see that. It certainly raised a lot of concern for me that the story is about New York City potentially losing over 19,000 homes over the next 15 years due to flooding from high tides and storms. And of course, we remember we began our work at WHCR following Superstorm Sandy in 2012, which devastated so much of Brooklyn and Far Rockaway. And we had people out there, Dave, they had water coming up 2 floors in their apartment buildings in public housing. And all the communication systems went out, internet went out, phones went out, and the only thing that worked was two-way radios. And it was from that experience, one of our guys, founder guys, Wally Abdul Noor is his name, was on his two-way radio at the time, hearing these reports and dire pleas from folks that had nowhere to go and nobody responding to them. It was his experience there that led to the development and the beginning of our WHCR emergency broadcast team in the winter of 2012 going into 2013. And what we learned from that experience was that we needed people on the ground that had their own communication systems that were independent of the major media and independent of major communication systems, essentially two-way radios, which is the only thing that reliably works when everything else goes out. And by everything else, I mean landline voice, I mean internet-based communications, and so we developed a whole community-based system of operators that we trained to use the two-way radios as a whole communication protocol that's involved in how you talk and communicate over these systems so that everyone can understand what you're talking about. You never know who's going to be on the air, David, in these type of situations. So you got to be able to talk to first responders and others in a common language. So that was a really hard lesson that we learned, and we are still at it some 12, 13 years later, continuing to train folks, predominantly in public and also affordable housing, creating community networks of trained responders, radio communication responders that keep us informed. And when I say us, one of the things that they do is they respond back to WHCR 90.3 FM so that we can be on the air and get messages out to the broader Harlem and South Bronx community. One of the things that also happened, Dave, during Hurricane Sandy was that folks could not get into the radio station. There were new flood zones. We did not know that some parts of Harlem were prone to flooding. So folks were unable to get into the radio station to report.
Let
Uh-huh.
me come in. Let me come in with that because actually, think 125th Street. You go past the subway all the way to the river. What do you find there?
Which river, east or west?
Hudson River.
Oh yeah. I think there's a couple of restaurants over there, maybe a market. Not a lot of business.
Most of those are gone. Columbia got rid of them. But what you would see there is almost a flat plain where you're maybe 2 feet or 4 feet above the river, and it goes back for 100 yards
Mhm.
at 125th Street. That has always been the one that the Columbia Geology Department has been afraid was going to get flooded.
Okay.
And in fact, Columbia is doing its huge build of north of 125th Street,
Right.
some of which buildings are really good. They bought half a mile of New York City, and they're going to build that for the next 100 years. When that was proposed, a Columbia geologist said they shouldn't do it because there's such a threat of flooding right there.
Really?
Yeah, this was years ago, but this is what you're going. Can we get some good news, please?
Yeah. Is there any, Dave? I saw that you had done a little bit of research on some of the positive results of AI in medicine. Maybe that's something that we can talk about. Some good news there.
Well, who do you, they did 100,000 mammograms in Sweden. Who do you think did better, the AI or the radiologist?
I think that's kind of a routine type of thing that the AI could probably learn pretty efficiently. That's my educated guess.
It's not routine yet. We've had stories about that, and everybody gets excited whenever there's good news there. But this is a really large study. 50,000 were read by AI and a radiologist.
Wow.
Another 50,000 just read with AI. They found about 7%, 13% more apparent breast cancers using the AI. Now,
Really?
almost were all very small, probably not dangerous, quite possibly would never have been anything to worry about, which says a very good thing about the radiologist. The AI was basically double checking the radiologist.
Hmm.
They found a few things, but not very much, because the
Okay, but
radiologist found
sound like the
almost
AI was
everything.
kind of digging a little bit deeper, it sounds like.
It could pick up some things that were really, really small,
Uh-huh.
and they're going even further. They are going to do 700,000 mammographies in England on the National Health Service.
Wow.
And we should have very definitive results coming out of that one.
So that's going to be an AI and human comparison and control experiment.
Well, that will be,
Hmm.
but it's actually wonderful that AI is starting to be able to do that. Think of any place in Central Africa. Think of a province with 30,000 people. How many radiologists do you think they have?
That smaller community, probably none.
There are probably none. And they may have only one or two doctors for
Hmm.
30,000 people. You see that across much of Africa. And in some places, we're talking about some of the rural US. We now don't have doctors.
Hmm.
But that's where the AI can make an enormous difference because you can have a semi trained person taking the mammographies, feeding them to the local AI, and catch the ones that really do need to go in and get a biopsy.
Hmm.
That will be saving lives, which is something that there's some people who don't care about.
But David, sounds like that's really taking remote medicine to a whole nother level of diagnosis. Using AI. We talked. I remember, maybe 10 years ago, uh, folks were just beginning to talk about using the internet for remote diagnosis of ailments, where physicians could not be on site, but they could collect data and maybe look at video and hear responses from patients and prescribe a potential treatment or at least get a diagnosis. But now with AI, it sounds like it has really ramped up to a whole nother level where hey, maybe you don't need that specialist intervening. Some of the AI software can do some of the diagnosis and sorting through the data and making recommendations and perhaps in
Now,
a more
now
fulsome way
let's
as well.
be really clear here. AI is not ready to replace your doctor. The only things we know for sure is that it can do things as well as a doctor, or pretty much as well as a doctor, in only a handful of applications.
Mhm.
Reading chest x-rays and mammography happens to be one of those. So that's wonderful, great news that that can be done. But don't pretend it's going to be standard and routine.
Not a panacea.
We talked on the show a few weeks ago about the Nobel Prizes, and Jeff Hinman of the University of Toronto got one of those for his work on backpropagation in AI. And he deserved it. He's done enormously successful work. But he also made a very big mistake about 8 years ago. He said in an interview that he thinks nobody should train in radiology anymore because in 6 years they won't be needed. Well, it's now 8 years or so.
Mhm.
AI can do a few things in radiology, and it's getting better every month, but they still need radiologists almost everywhere.
Yeah,
So it's great that you can use the AI where you don't have radiologists. It's great that it can back up the radiologist, but the AI people suddenly think impossible things are going to happen. Now, last week you asked me, what is AI doing that really matters? And
yeah.
I said, if you don't write for a living, not that much. Although we were starting to get some health things going. AI, this is one of the things that, as I say, we're starting to get done. That's very welcome. But again and again, I'm working with this full time. Don't believe the hype. And a lot of that hype is perfectly honest.
Mhm. Well, what's some of the good stuff that is happening, Dave? What's some of the non-hype achievements that's happening? I saw that you forwarded a story about AI developing a protein tool that fought or that fights poison from snakes, from snake bites. What was that about?
Well, the DNA so small that it's inside a small part of a cell that is so small you can't see it without a powerful microscope,
Mhm.
is three dimensionals folded over itself in an enormously complicated pattern. So complicated that you can have yards and yards of DNA if you ran it in a straight loop, which was all we knew about, and it fits inside the little bit of space inside the cell that's so small you can't see it without a microscope. And the way biological tools work, the way your body's proteins and DNA and everything do, is in 3 dimensions. And the latest is a team up at MIT have figured out how to get the 3 dimensional from the 2 dimensional DNA stuff with the quite high accuracy. It's very hard to do it. It's expensive and it hasn't been done that much. But they found 2,000 examples where it was done, and they ran it to the AI, and the AI found pretty much the same patterns, which is very welcome. Now, there was another Nobel Prize, which, excuse me, went to John Jumper and Dennis Hassabis for AlphaFold. This was the one that convinced anybody who had any reason to doubt that there were good things about to happen. A decade ago, AI, no, 2 decades ago, AI built, AI beat the world champion in chess. 10 years ago, they beat the world champion in a much harder game. It looks so simple, but it turns out that Go is much harder.
Hmm.
And that was an enormous achievement that nobody thought was going to come for another 10 years at that point. People were totally shocked. And it was Demis Hassabis who led that team. Well, he took those tools that he used to win Go and he put it into figuring out the structure of proteins. What is structure of proteins? If you want to know how hemoglobin works, you can't just say, oh, these are the chemicals in there. You have to say everything about its three-dimensional structure. And did you read the double helix? Do you know how they found the DNA structure back in
I don't know how
1953?
they. I remember it was a big deal. Two guys that won the Nobel Prize, but no, how did they do it? How did they find it?
Well, two guys and one woman who should have won that same Nobel, but they didn't give the Nobel out for about 6 years and she died in the interim. But that's a story everybody uses in science about how women were pushed aside.
Mhm.
In order to find the structure of DNA, you had to do something called X-ray crystallography. X-rays are very small, so they can show you very fine features, much better than you can with a light microscope. And at King's College in London, oh God, I'm forgetting her name. I'm getting old. I'm forgetting far too much.
Yeah, that's okay,
Rosalind
Dave.
Franklin uh, did the work, spent months taking X-ray pictures of the structure of DNA. Two Cambridge scientists, Crick and Watson, came to visit the lab. And 6 months later, they came out with what was really the structure of some kinds of DNA. The double helix actually doesn't apply to all DNA, but the double helix that they made, and they had made a model, physical model, with sticks and balls and so on, showing what it was like. And that's the famous illustration of the double helix. That is something that could very rarely be done. The first protein that was structured was hemoglobin, and that was 10 years after that. And now there are like, I don't know, 10,000 proteins that have been structured. No, 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 no. I'm getting protein. Which is proteins and which is nucleic acids? What was the work that I'm thinking of? Alpha fold, yes, is the structure of nucleic acids, the DNA, and so on. And suddenly, Demis, who had beat Louis Smolin, the world champion, in Go, was able to figure out the structure of 180,000.
This is an AI model you're talking about, Demis.
With using an AI model,
Uh,
it's a person, Demis, who happened to be a chess champion when he was a kid, and then went on to make games, and now is leading Google's effort in AI around the
okay.
world. What do you think he got his PhD in?
I have no idea. Not computer science, I guess. That would be too obvious.
Yeah, I wouldn't be asking you that. He, since he was a kid, and he tells this story. I haven't met him, but it's all on YouTube and other places. That since he was a kid, he wanted to figure out how the brain worked. And the brain is much more complicated than anybody thought 20 years ago, and than anybody except a scientist who knows what's going on thinks today. they're talking about trillions and trillions of neurons and connections in there. And I don't know, number like 1900 different organs within your brain,
Mm.
the Broca's brain, and so on and so forth. He wanted to solve that. This was 30 years ago. And so, after he was a chess champion, after he wrote some computer games that did pretty well, he decided to go back to school in neuroscience.
Okay.
And that turned out to be just to the point. We call them neural networks. You're working with what's called a neuron, which is just a few numbers inside your model. You have billions and now trillions of those for things that we look. How close is that to the real brain and real neurons?
Probably not very. It's probably just a model that you know, maybe shows a slim factor of what the whole system is. But I don't
You
know.
got it right.
Uh-huh.
And for the last 10 years, 10 years, 15 years, it's been going back and forth. The people working on the computers, like Demis, look at the structure of the brain and say, hey, that's how we're going to do it. Meanwhile, the people working directly with the brain, the functional MRIs and so on, look at what the computer scientists are finding out and say, hey, that looks really interesting. Let me see if it happens in people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not the same thing. They're not even that close, but they're close enough that the two fields are learning a heck of a lot from each other.
Okay, well, bring it home for us, Dave. What's the actual impact of all of this advancement in AI now being able to look at proteins and develop proteins? What's the bottom line results so far? What have they been able to accomplish that layperson can kind of wrap their brain around?
Well, think how long it takes for a drug to get to market. It first has to be tested in the test tube.
Hmm.
Then you put it in different kinds of animals. And there's years before it's tried in people. We now have several medicines that were created using AI that are in early trials with people. And there are probably hundreds, maybe even more, in the test tube, checking whether they work, whether they're safe, whether the fish go to animals, when they go to animals before it goes to people. So it's absolutely clear that it's defining medicines. It's likely that some of these will be available to doctors to use in 3 years, 8 years. So we're seeing that. But I keep saying don't believe the hype because I'm in the middle of this stuff. And the hype is enormous. But some of it is completely honest. If you were somebody like Demis Hassabis or Jeff Hinton, Jeff's case, he spent 35 years working in AI. Demis has been maybe 15 years in. Sam Altman maybe 10 years in. And almost all the people leading AI have been doing it for at least 5 or 10 years and often more. Now, somebody who's devoted 5 or 10 years of their life to AI, what do you think they believe AI is worth?
Well, you know, if you look at what's going on in the market, billions and billions of dollars, if you want to measure it in terms of money.
Nah, we're talking about people who are in academia, and sure, they want to make money, and some of them have gotten very, very rich. I'll tell you a story in a moment. But they believe in what they're doing.
Okay, well, they're probably
Now,
going to turn the world around and revolutionize medicine and healthcare and so much of how we live our lives. I imagine
and you've
that's what they're
heard
looking
that
at.
in every television news show, you've
Mhm.
heard that in every newspaper,
Right?
and a lot of it is because the people who really know, in order to become an expert, you had to spend 5 or 10 years learning. Almost all of them have PhDs. And they really believe in it. So when Jeff Hinman says we're going to replace radiologists in 6 years, it's because he's worked 35 years in AI, thinks it's great, and only sees the things that are hopeful. Now, let's take this home. Robert Kennedy, a few hours ago, Robert Kennedy Jr., was what made it through the Senate committee to become Health and Human Services Secretary. There's a lot we can say about that. But he has had many opinions about COVID, about vaccines, about fluoride, that nearly none of the scientists agree with. There's a number of the folks like him who believe things that are totally opposite what 99% of the scientists have believed for years and decades. What does the term confirmation bias mean to you?
It means that, whatever it is that you believe, that's what you see when you look around the world. You see the stuff that confirms what you already believe, and you block out and don't even see the stuff that would contradict that.
And that's part of what's happening with the MAGA and the madness of crowds and so on. But the one that really surprised me when I started understanding this stuff for a while back and reading the psychology is that the smarter you are, the more likely you are to get things wrong because of your confirmation bias.
Yeah, I know everything. Yeah. That's interesting.
If you got a whole lot of things right, your brain thinks you're going to get everything right.
Everything right, exactly.
And we see what happens when you take an Elon Musk and let him try to talk about politics.
Right. Well, Dave, that's it. We got to take a break. That's an interesting notion. And I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned Musk and the government. I want to talk a little bit when we come back after the break about all the dismantling that's going on with so many of the agencies and what impact that might have in technology and healthcare, education, etc.
And I'll have a good example for you.
Okay.
The structure of the COVID virus and how that was done.
Okay, this is Community and Technology on WHR 90.3 FM with Dave Bernstein and Stu Reed. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break.
Wake up, everybody, no more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking, time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. There's so much hatred, war and poverty. Wake up, all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. 'Cause they're the ones who's coming up, and the world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. Na 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 na. The world won't get no better. We gotta change it now, just you and me. Wake Wake up all the doctors, make the old people well. They're the ones who suffer and who catch all the hair. But they don't have so very long before their judgment day. So won't you make them happy before they pass away? Wake up all the builders, time to build a new land. I know we could do it if we all lend a hand. The only thing we have to do is put it in our minds. Surely things will work out, they do it every time. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. Na, 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 na. The world won't get no better. We gotta change it, yeah. Just you and me. Yeah. Change it, yeah. Change it, yeah. Just you and me. Change it, yeah. Change it. Can't do it alone. Can't do it alone. Need some help, y'all. Can't do it alone. Can't do it alone. Yeah.
Okay, we're back. Community Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM with Dave Bernstein and Stu Reed. Dave, there's a lot going on in DC, obviously. That's not news to folks, but, some of the details are a little alarming. Just looking at the cutbacks in information, online information that's available to the general public by so many agencies. It's kind of frightening. I just want to give a quick summary of some of what we've come across here. Some 8,000 web pages have been deleted by dozens of U.S. government agency websites, taken down since last week.
Why?
Purges.
Why were they doing it? Who did it and why?
Well, when President Trump did it, he's the guy behind it.
But it was actually done totally by the people in the agencies under orders from Trump.
Yeah. I mean, Trump doesn't know how to do this stuff himself. It wouldn't happen if he had to actually do it. But, he gives the order, he gives the directives, and folks are scrambling to try and, please the boss. And
That sounds like something that happens in communist China.
It certainly does. It certainly does.
Hiding the truth.
It seems, I won't say random, but it seems like such a broadside blow. He's taking down information about vaccines, about veterans' health care, about hate crimes, scientific research. 3,000 pages from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention came down because they talked about STD treatment and information about Alzheimer's warning signs, overdose prevention and training, guidelines for pregnant people. Took that down. Another 3,000 pages from the Census Bureau came down with articles about research on finding missing people, on data stewardship policies and documentation, how to navigate through the documentation sets on census data. I mean, come on. 1,000 pages from the Justice Department taken down. Features on teenage dating violence. And the blog posts that have gone about hate, combating hate crime, taken down. 200 pages from Head Start program that I used to work in back in my college days for low-income kids, including advice on helping families establish routines and videos about preventing postpartum depression. Erased. More than 180 pages from the Department of Justice, including state-level hate crime data. Erased. Another 150 pages from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. Erased. 100 pages from the Food and Drug Administration. Erased. I mean, this is such a broad scale attack, Dave. You mentioned a dictator in some, communist country. It doesn't look like it's targeted. It doesn't look analytical. It doesn't look scientific. It looks like he's taking a big brush, and I think he is a big brush, and anything that smacks of any
Wokeism.
philosophy that he disagrees with, whether it be egalitarianism, whether it be inclusiveness, whether it be human rights, whether it be self-care. It's gone. We can't talk about that stuff. We, the government.
And it's much worse than you think, even when you see the headlines about the hundreds of people Trump has fired and the entire departments, the Department of Aid, what Agency for International Development, for example, was just shut down.
Wow.
That one really hits home. There are hundreds of people in Africa who are alive today because the AIDS drugs are working. And given what those things cost, the African nations could never have gotten that. Some of that, a big hunk of that came, I think it was George Bush who said, we can save these lives. It's going to be expensive, but we're going to do it. That's one of the programs that got cut. Every time you see something cut, they're talking $500 billion over 10 years to cut out of Medicaid. You're saying people will die. And that's horrifying. And they shut down the grants in NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which has been an enormous share of the research on health. That now is really helping. In fact, well, let's get on to the next bit there. But cutting health care, and cutting health research.
Unconscionable, Dave. It's unconscionable. What a retreat from, what this country supposedly stands for. Taking care of its own and feeding the hungry and the unclothed and the needy.
They're cutting food stamps.
Yeah.
The Republicans wanted to. These things which I just mentioned, the Medicaid and food stamp, haven't happened yet. They're just proposals.
Mm-hmm. But that's the road they're going down. Self-reliance, and if you can't hack it with your own resources, tough. Sorry. And to me, they're cutting out all the safety nets, all of the social service support systems, all of the undergirdment of the poor and the disenfranchised that this country has helped make this country strong. And him pulling that stuff out, his mantra is "Make America Great Again," but he is really dismantling all the pillars of the nation as I see it.
Well, I don't think we're a Christian nation. The people who call themselves Christian want to assert that America was started.
That's lip service. Lip service.
It's worse than lip service. If you've read the Bible and Jesus saying how you have to help the poor, which incidentally is also in the Jewish literature and in the Quran, if you are a devout Christian, you try to help other people. It's your obligation as a Christian. So I say that there are 100 million people in this country who think they're Christians, but their life says they're not. That's a very strong personal opinion. And it's a rude thing to say, but I think I explained the context in which I said it. The Bible says you help your neighbor, you help the poor, that Sam Altman and Elon Musk are going to find it very hard to get to heaven because it's harder than a camel going through the head of a pin. That's in the Bible.
My question, Dave, is, if they bankrupt the country, and they disenfranchise hundreds of millions of people, who is going to be buying the products of these billionaires to keep them afloat? I mean, where do they think their revenue is going to come from if the folks, they eliminate the middle class, they, decimate the purchasing power of most of America through these efforts? I mean, how are they going to stay afloat? I mean, I don't even see any capitalist logic in that.
I'm not going to follow up on that because this show is community and technology.
Okay, well, I'm getting too deep in the
And
weeds.
that's what we care about, and that's what we're doing. And we try not to spend
Okay,
time
thank you,
too much
Dave. Thank you,
time on
Dave.
politics.
Pull me back from the precipice. Thank you.
Well, let's explain what this is doing that applies to community and technology. People who are getting support in housing in New York City, the checks for that are late, and the payments to the landlords have been put behind.
Hmm.
I've talked about, I've discovered how remarkable some of the hospitals in New York are, especially Mount Sinai. I've got an unbelievable quality of care since I've had problems. They're going to cut the money to the major urban teaching hospitals. That is something that affects our community. Now, let me give you some good news. This is the best year in COVID since before the epidemic.
Okay.
It's gone down significantly, and that's very good news. But I wanted to bring that story again because we're here to do this because we want to help the community and because it's fun sometimes. It turns out that we are having one of the worst flu seasons ever. And flu kills far more people than you can imagine if you didn't happen to know what was going on. Hospitals every fall and winter get crowded and don't have beds because there's so many people in with flu, especially the old folks. But I'm getting pretty old myself. That is something that had convinced me that it's right to go back to masking, which only works some, but every some, we're talking about saving lives at this point, not to avoid COVID, but to protect yourself from the flu. Now, Stu, tell me about COVID today, this year in this our area.
Well, as we speak right now today, Dave, I in fact have COVID. I came down with it over the weekend. Today is Tuesday, and it knocked me out. I was in bed for a day and a half Saturday and Sunday. Um, I'm back up. I'm up and about. I'm still congested and not feeling great, but I'm probably 75%. But that's a lot better than what we were seeing 4 years ago, 2020, when folks were getting put on ventilators and folks were actually dropping dead like flies. So,
Dead like flies. Wait a minute. I live on 119th Street. St. Luke's Hospital on 114th Street had a refrigerated trailer just to keep the bodies.
yeah, I know. I live in New Rochelle, 2 blocks from the hospital, the main hospital, and they too had a big tractor trailer full of bodies, Dave. A whole trailer of bodies, because they ran out of space inside their morgue, where they were warehousing folks who died from COVID, and that's 2 blocks from my house. So I saw it firsthand. I know people that checked out, that just dropped dead. And it was so disheartening. I don't have to remind our listening audience. They know. I'm sure everybody knows folks had close people to them who died from that, and it was such a disheartening. They put people in isolation, and you couldn't have visitors, and so many folks died alone. It was very, very tragic the way that went down. And maybe some folks have
The
amnesia
worst
about that, but it
epidemic
was
in
unforgettable for me.
at least 100 years.
Yeah, yeah. It
That's pretty
was it
serious.
was it was catastrophic.
1 million people, and we can talk about whole loads of things, but bringing it home, what I intend to do now, and I was careless and didn't do it when I went out yesterday, is wear a mask, which offers limited protection,
Yeah.
but any protection is valuable.
Yeah. Well,
How much time do we have?
I just wanted to say something, Dave. There's so much anti-science mentality with these new guys coming into the administration. From what I see, it was science that kind of saved us from that pandemic. And the way that they were able to come up with the vaccines and get them produced and out there and distributed, I think that may have saved millions and millions of lives. And to me, it's such a tragedy now.
It's not May.
Yeah,
Around,
they
not
did.
maybe in the United States alone,
Yeah.
millions. We have lost 1 million people, and
But,
around the world,
what we're seeing, Dave,
absolutely.
in healthcare with this new, with the Kennedy guy and in the climate change denial, we're seeing so much anti-science thinking that is now coming into vogue, becoming popular to debunk and dismiss the science. I think that's a very dangerous trend that's going on.
And it's tempting to say, look, I happen to have been involved or known the people who were involved in a lot of the USAID programs trying to distribute broadband around the world. And most of them were a joke.
Mhm.
Most of them weren't informed. Most of them did very little. There's definitely lots of waste in the United States State Department. And I speak that saying I was on the State Department committee for 12 years, so I know a little bit about it. And getting rid of the waste, absolutely. But you got to protect the things that really matter.
Yeah.
And food for the poor and housing for the people who don't have housing and decent medical care for everything, in my mind, is a human right.
Yeah, absolutely. And a parallel, Dave, I worked for the EEOC back under the Carter administration, and in their public affairs office, and I was also a special advisor to the chair at the time, Eleanor Holmes Norton. So I got a chance
Oh,
to look.
she's a hero to me. I didn't
Oh
know you
yeah,
worked
yeah,
for her.
she's quite an incredible woman. Still alive, still kicking, still fighting, still carrying on the good fight, the struggle. But what I saw was, just how corporate America had just ripshod against black and brown and Asian and Latino people. And if it weren't for the EEOC bringing them to court and bringing them to justice, I mean, so many folks would still not have access to jobs and employment. So, I mean, that was such a good and righteous mission that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission embarked on. And, that was 40 years ago when I was there. And now, we still have problems in corporate America, of course, in particular in the upper echelons. You have not seen much other than token appointments. But still, we need the EEOC there fighting, and that's another agency that Trump is trying to dismantle.
Let me come in there because, in fact, there are many minorities who now are on top of the U.S. corporate world.
I put that
Yeah.
on top of
I
in
didn't say
quotation
black,
marks,
I said
Dave. Put that
minorities.
in quotation marks on top of.
Not, the head of Google is an immigrant from India.
Mm.
The head of Microsoft is an immigrant in India. And we had a number that I had researched to putting on the air that 60% of the leaders in technology are Asian themselves or their parents were immigrants.
Mhm.
So that we have not done right by many communities. And there's a price to any discrimination. I'm going to see Audra McDowell in Gypsy on Friday. She's one of the finest actresses out there. She's a great singer, and I'm really looking forward to it. I can't afford to go to Broadway very often, but I stretched for this.
Mm-hmm.
She's a Black woman. Not so long ago, Black women would not be getting jobs leading on Broadway. And that is something that hurts all of us.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
My example on that, and then I think we're almost done.
Yeah.
What is the price of discrimination? Well, Billie Holiday singing "Lover Come Back to Me" is unforgettable. It's from a musical that was filmed in Hollywood with Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald. And oh, did it hurt when I saw that movie. And all I could think of was how much better Billie Holiday was there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a price that you pay for discrimination.
Yeah.
That is probably and Gary Becker won a Nobel Prize. He came up with the numbers and these ideas, the economics of discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we started the show talking about a study that said we could lose 15,000 homes in New York if we had any of several disasters that are quite possible, as big as Los Angeles. Stu, since we know that in New York we can have fires, we can have hurricanes,
Don't forget floods. I mean, that's what devastated us with Sandy, the flooding, which we didn't think was a vulnerability for New York City, but we learned otherwise.
And we may have an airplane going into a building.
Yeah, you
with
never
two
know.
airplanes killing 10,000 people. What's the practical things that people should do to protect themselves that you talk about in the programs you're doing on public safety here at WHCR?
Well, one of the things I'll say, visit our website, WHCREBT.org. That's WHCREBT for Emergency Broadcast Team.org, and learn about some of the stuff that we're doing to help learn about emergency preparedness. I would ask folks that are interested. We also have a communication training program, training folks to operate handheld radios and be eyes and ears in their community. We're actually having a entry-level training session online this Saturday. And if anyone out there would be interested, please email me and I can sign you up. My email address, I'll give it out on the air here, is Stu Reid, STUREID, at live.com. Email me and I can hook you up with free training that's this Saturday morning online to begin to learn about becoming an emergency responder. I think at the end of the day, Dave, we have to be responsible ourselves for our own public safety. We can't count on first responders. We can't count on the government or others. We got to count on each other. So we got to build community. We got to build network on the ground, and we got to have communication tools, and we got to have knowledge and information about what to do in an emergency. So please.
Because it can happen here.
Yeah, it will happen. It has happened, and it will repeat itself. So
bird flu could kill somebody, and that probably won't be a pandemic, but it certainly could be. And that's the kind of thing that happens in this world, and we have to be prepared.
Okay. That's it for today. You've been listening to Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m., 90.3 FM, and on the web at WHCR.org. Tune in. Just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.